Welcome to BL Stories, where romance, drama, and unforgettable boys' love come to life. Love knows no limits, and the best stories aren't always straight. Subscribe now and join our growing BL-loving family. Chapter 23. Sammy's POV. You really need to protect that face better. It's too nice to be getting bruised like this. The moment those words slipped out, I froze. Did I just call Dante nice looking? Oh no, I actually said that out loud. A strange, nervous feeling twisted in my stomach when Dante looked at me. His large, brown, expressive eyes met mine with a quiet curiosity that sent a chill through me. Maybe it was the soft evening light from the gym that made him look that captivating. That had to be it, right? I started, my voice barely a whisper. But then my gaze betrayed me, landing on his lips. They were soft-looking, slightly swollen, the kind you couldn't help but notice. He had this habit of curling his lower lip inward when he was concentrating, like when he watched one of the fighters in the ring. There was something about him that quietly drew me in, though I couldn't explain why. I didn't even realize if it was me leaning forward or him. All I knew was that a few seconds later, his lips brushed against mine. For a brief moment, everything stopped. His lips were warm, hesitant, and my breath caught in my throat. The world outside the ring seemed to fade. Then, just as suddenly as it happened, Dante pulled away. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost, eyes wide, frozen in disbelief. When I finally met his gaze again, I saw regret flash across his face. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have, he stammered before quickly standing and heading for the exit. I didn't even have time to react. The front door slammed behind him, leaving me standing there, speechless. What had just happened? 1 minute, he kissed me, or was it that he kissed me and I didn't respond? It took a moment for my mind to catch up, but when it did, I rushed upstairs to grab the building keys. My heart was racing. How could I have just stood there like that? Dante's POV. I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. What was I thinking? I actually did that. I kissed him. And the look on Sammy's face afterward, that shock, it said everything. I had completely misunderstood the moment. My heart pounded harder as I walked aimlessly, ending up in a neighborhood I didn't even recognize. Graffiti-covered walls. Barred windows. The sound of distant traffic. Eventually, I found an old park and sat down on a rusted swing, trying to calm down. But no matter how much I tried to clear my mind, Sammy's expression haunted me. Nice going, Dante, I muttered under my breath. You really messed this one up. What was I supposed to do now? He probably didn't want me working for him anymore. Maybe he didn't even want me staying under the same roof. I shoved my hands into my hoodie pocket, my fingers brushing against something, the Fight Club key card. When did I even put that there? Just then, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. It's going to rain, I whispered, glancing around the unfamiliar street. And sure enough, a few seconds later, the first drop hit my cheek. Then another. Then more. I pulled up my hood, though it didn't help much. The sweatshirt was already soaking through. The streets looked different now, darker, quieter, almost eerie. Had I gone down the street before? I slowed when I noticed movement ahead. 3 figures were walking toward me, men by the look of it. 2 of them had their faces partially covered. My chest tightened. Something about them made me uneasy. This can't be happening right now, I whispered, forcing myself to stay calm. I crossed the street, hoping they'd just pass by, but the moment one of them changed direction to follow, my stomach dropped. Their pace quickened. My instincts kicked in. I ran. I turned down the next corner I saw, not knowing where it led, just praying it would take me somewhere safe. But as soon as I rounded the corner, I stopped short. A tall brick wall loomed in front of me. A dead end. I turned as the sound of footsteps echoed through the rain. Hey kid, one of the men called out. You lost. My breath hitched as the storm rumbled overhead. Chapter 24. Dante's POV. As I turned around, I came face to face with the 3 men who had cornered me at the end of the alleyway. Rain poured heavily around us, making it difficult to see their faces clearly even though they were standing close now. All 3 wore dark hoodies pulled over their heads, but only 2 had black masks covering the lower halves of their faces. The third man, the one without a mask, was the first to speak, the same voice I'd heard moments ago. "It's getting a little late to be walking around this area," he said. His voice was lighter than I expected, given his build. 2 of them were tall and muscular, their soaked hoodies clinging to their frames, while the third one was a bit shorter but looked no less intimidating. I tried to think quickly. I was just jogging and lost track of time. "I'm not from around here," I said. It sounded reasonable in my head, but as soon as the words left my mouth, I realized I'd probably made myself look like an easy target. The unmasked man grinned, pushing his hood back slightly to reveal a scar beside his left eye. The dim light from the street lamp glinted off the raindrops on his face. "Oh, we can tell," he replied, taking a step closer. "We just need to take our share, and then you can go." My pulse quickened. I didn't have my wallet. I'd left everything back at Sammy's place. "I don't have anything on me," I said honestly. His grin widened as if that answer pleased him even more. "Then you won't mind if we double-check," he said, stepping forward. I knew then that I wouldn't get out of this without a fight. The man lunged at me, throwing a fast punch. I barely dodged, backing away just in time. He was strong, though his technique had flaws. Still, there were 3 of them and only 1 of me. He charged again, landing a hard blow to my ribs that made me gasp for air. Pain rippled through my side. Instinct took over. I countered with a right hook that sent him stumbling back. I couldn't waste the opportunity. With quick precision, I threw a combination: jab, cross, hook, uppercut. His large frame fell backward, hitting the ground hard. He didn't get back up. I glanced at the remaining 2 men. The smaller one tensed like he was about to attack, but the larger one stopped him. Then, the big guy reached into his pocket and pulled out something that gleamed under the streetlight. A knife. Cold dread washed over me. I just brought fists to a knife fight. He lunged forward, slashing at me. I managed to dodge, but the blade came dangerously close. "You're quick," he said through the rain. My body was aching, exhaustion setting in after everything that had happened earlier. My movements slowed, my lungs burning. "But not quick enough," he added, charging again. This time, I caught his wrist mid-swing, twisting it back until the knife slipped from his hand and clattered onto the wet pavement. I landed a quick punch to his jaw, forcing him to stumble back. I shifted my stance, trying to position myself closer to the street. The thought of running flashed in my mind, but the last man was blocking my only exit. Before I could decide what to do, a voice echoed through the rain. "Dante!" I turned toward the sound. Sammy was standing at the corner of the street, soaked to the bone, his hoodie pushed back, his eyes wide with worry. For a second, I thought I was imagining him. But he started running toward me, and reality hit. Before he could reach me, the smaller man stepped between us. "Who are you?" the man barked. "Take your friends and leave," Sammy said firmly. His voice was low, calm, but carried a weight that made even the rain seem quieter. I'd never heard him sound like that before, cold, steady, dangerous. The smaller man hesitated, taking half a step back. I started to move towards Sammy, and for a moment, our eyes met, a flash of emotion passing between us. "Behind you!" Sammy shouted suddenly. It took me a split second too long to react. When I turned, I caught a flash of silver before pain seared across my upper arm. I stumbled back, clutching the wound, feeling the sting spread through my shoulder. The man I'd thought was unconscious was on his feet again, though barely. Blood mixed with the rain as it dripped from my sleeve to the cracked pavement. He lunged again, but his movements were sluggish this time. I dodged easily and struck back with my good arm, knocking him to the ground. He didn't move again. When I looked up, Sammy was already fighting the smaller man. He had cornered him against the brick wall, moving with speed and precision I'd never seen before. The man tried to duck, but Sammy's hand caught the edge of his hood and slammed him against the wall with one clean motion. I froze in place, stunned. The man fell to the ground, motionless. Before I could even process what had just happened, Sammy grabbed my hand. "Come on," he said breathlessly, his fingers tightening around mine. "Run." And so, through the pouring rain we did. Chapter 25. Sammy's POV. By the time we made it back to Fight Club, Dante and I were completely exhausted. We collapsed onto the gym mats, both drenched from the heavy rain pouring outside. The sound of raindrops hitting the pavement filled the quiet space. I couldn't tell what time it was anymore. Everything had become a blur. When I remembered the GPS keycard I had slipped into Dante's hoodie that morning, I didn't waste a second. I turned on the tracker, grabbed my jacket, and ran through the rain to find him. It took longer than I expected. I hadn't realized Dante could run that fast. Now, watching him clutch his arm, I could tell he'd been hurt. Blood mixed with water on the mat beneath him, seeping from a cut on his left sleeve. "Come on," I said gently. "Let me take a look before it gets worse." Dante hesitated, avoiding my eyes. He stood up slowly, wincing as he accidentally put pressure on his injured arm. It's okay. I can handle it," he murmured, his voice unsteady. "Don't be ridiculous," I said, trying to sound calm but firm. "I've got a first aid kit upstairs." We climbed the stairs to my flat above the gym. Every step felt heavier than the last, our soaked shoes squelching against the floor. I pointed toward the couch. "Sit down. Careful with your side." "I'll be fine," he said again, trying to reassure me. I shook my head. "You're not. Take off your hoodie so I can clean that cut." He hesitated but obeyed, peeling off the wet fabric. Unsure where to set it, he handed it to me. I reached into the pocket and, sure enough, found the small key card. "What's that?" Dante asked curiously. "It's an access card for the lockers downstairs," I explained. Grayson kept losing his, so I had GPS trackers installed. I didn't have any pockets this morning, so I slipped one into your hoodie while picking up materials for the roof. If it hadn't been for that small decision, I might never have found him tonight. He looked thoughtful for a moment, guilt flickering across his face. "I'm so sorry," he said softly, "for running off. And your hand." His gaze shifted to my right hand, still bruised and swollen from earlier. I shook my head. "Don't apologize. You have nothing to be sorry for. Now hold still." I opened the first aid kit and sat beside him. The thin white shirt clung to his skin from the rain, and the sleeve around his arm was stained red. The cut was deep, not life-threatening, but enough to worry me. I pulled out the disinfectant and some gauze, leaning closer to clean the wound. Dante stared straight ahead like a soldier bracing for impact. When the gauze touched his skin, he flinched slightly. "Keep still," I said gently. He immediately did, though I noticed his whole body tense up. When I glanced at him, I realized my hand was resting lightly on his thigh. Embarrassed, I quickly moved it to his shoulder instead. I continued cleaning and drying the wound. Every now and then, his muscles tensed with small shivers from the cold, making me pause for a moment longer than I should have. My focus started to drift, from his arm to the line of his collarbone, to the water dripping from his curls down his neck. When my fingers brushed his shoulder, he drew in a quick breath. "Sammy," he whispered, voice barely audible. Something about the way he said my name made my chest tighten. The space between us seemed to grow smaller without either of us realizing it. My hand moved instinctively, brushing back a few strands of his damp hair. His eyes half closed, and for a long second, neither of us looked away. Before I could think twice, I leaned forward and kissed him. This time, I didn't freeze or pull away. I just let the moment happen. His lips were soft and cool from the rain, but the warmth behind the touch was unmistakable. The world outside faded. All I could hear was the sound of the rain, steady and unrelenting, as if it mirrored the rhythm of my heart. Somewhere behind us, something fell, probably the first aid kit, but neither of us noticed. The kiss was gentle but full of everything we hadn't said all day. Worry, relief, confusion, and something deeper neither of us had the courage to name. For a few fleeting seconds, the chaos of the night melted away. Then, before I could process what happened, Dante shifted, maybe to steady himself, and we both lost our balance. I stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the coffee table before landing on the floor. Dante gasped. "Sammy!" I blinked up at him, dazed but mostly fine. My head throbbed a little, but nothing serious. Despite everything, the fight, the rain, the confusion, all I could do was look at him and manage a faint smile. The chaos had quieted, but my heart had never been louder. Chapter 26. Dante's POV. My heart pounded as I looked at Sammy in complete shock and embarrassment. I hadn't meant to push him away so suddenly, I'd reacted out of instinct. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," I blurted, quickly reaching out to help him up. His face was flushed deep red, and that only made my guilt worse. "I didn't mean to, It's okay," Sammy interrupted gently. "I shouldn't have done that." The look in his eyes hit me harder than any words could. It wasn't anger, but disappointment, maybe even regret. It reminded me of that same sinking feeling I had earlier, thinking I'd ruined everything between us. Before I could stop myself, I spoke. "It's not that I didn't want to, Sammy. I did." My voice stumbled over the words. "I just think, with how closely we work together, it might be better if we kept things professional." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes softening with understanding. "I get it," he said finally, his tone calm but weary. "For now, let's just focus on getting cleaned up and some rest. It's been a long day, and you still have work tomorrow morning." At the mention of work, my exhaustion came crashing back. Sammy continued, "Go ahead and change out of those wet clothes. Leave them in the hamper, I'll take care of them after my shower." "Thank you," I said quietly, giving him a small smile. "No problem," he replied before heading downstairs. Once he was gone, I slowly began the difficult task of peeling off my rain-soaked clothes, my mind replaying everything that had just happened. Sammy's POV. As soon as I let my body sink into the mattress, I exhaled deeply. Every muscle in me felt heavy, but my mind refused to rest. It was well past midnight, and Dante was already asleep. I stayed awake a little longer, trying to jot down some training notes, but my thoughts kept wandering back to that moment between us. Every time I remembered the kiss, my heart would race all over again. It wasn't just the kiss itself, it was everything behind it. The connection, the confusion, the timing. I understood why Dante had stopped. I respected his boundaries. Still, I couldn't help but wish that moment had lasted just a little longer. His words echoed in my head. We should keep things professional. It was the right decision, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. The quiet sound of Dante shifting in his sleep filled the room. Every small movement, the creak of the mattress, the steady rhythm of his breathing, slowly lulled me into peace. And with that, I finally drifted off. By the time I got out of bed, Dante had already left for work. Fridays usually meant early shifts at Tidal Wave, especially for shipments and inventory. He had moved quietly that morning, careful not to wake me. I'd only half opened my eyes as I heard him gather his things and head downstairs. When I finally decided to get up, it was already close to 8. My morning peace didn't last long, though. Grayson came storming up the stairs with his usual energy. "Why aren't the mats rolled out yet? And the weight still racked? And why are you still in bed?" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me sitting there with a bandaged hand and a faint bruise on my forehead. "Sammy, what happened to you?" I tried to get up, suppressing a groan. Hiding my injured hand didn't make much sense now. Grayson's eyes widened as he looked me over. "Seriously, what happened?" That was a tough question. I didn't want to drag Dante into this, but I couldn't exactly lie, either. Dante got lost near Hunts Point last night. Some guys cornered him, and things got a little out of hand. We handled it, but I banged up my hand in the process. Grayson's confusion deepened. "Wait, how did he even end up over there? And your forehead?" I paused, searching for something simple. "He went out for a run. And I fell off the couch last night." The look he gave me made it obvious he didn't believe that, but thankfully he didn't press further. We had too much to do to waste time with questions. With a skeptical shake of his head, Grayson dropped the subject and helped me start setting up the gym for the day. Dante's POV. I tried my best to stay focused while Cassie walked me through the morning restock. But no matter how many times I reminded myself that keeping distance from Sammy was the right thing, my thoughts kept circling back to last night. That moment we shared, brief, unexpected, and charged with everything we didn't say, stayed with me. No matter how hard I tried to focus on work, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Chapter 27. Sammy's POV. Friday was going about as well as you'd expect. In other words, a complete mess. With my injured hand, I had no choice but to spar with the new trainees. Normally, I tried to avoid that because their energy was unpredictable. They meant well, but their lack of focus and control could really test anyone's patience. The truth was, my hand wasn't ready to handle sparring with the veteran fighters. If I wanted it to heal before our first fight night, I needed to take it easy, even if it meant dealing with a dozen overenthusiastic beginners. Meanwhile, Grayson was running drills with the more experienced members, already deep into warm-ups and combos. I, on the other hand, was gripping the hand pad tighter than I should have, trying not to lose my cool as Kyle drifted off for what felt like the 100th time. By evening, the gym was finally quiet again. I exhaled deeply, wiping the sweat from my forehead as Grayson and I began putting the equipment back in place. "This has been the longest short day ever," I said with a sigh. "Agreed," Grayson replied, stretching his back. "Sunday can't come soon enough. It feels like we haven't had a real day off in forever." Technically, he wasn't wrong. Even on Sundays, I usually caught up on planning or paperwork. Rest days were more of an illusion than a reality. "Are you still planning on going this weekend?" Grayson asked, glancing at me as if he already knew the answer. "It's been a few months since your last visit." I shrugged. "Yeah, I think I should." He didn't push for details, just nodded knowingly. We finished resetting the gym for the next day, both of us ready to call it a night. Dante's POV. By the time I made it back to Fight Club that evening, I was running on fumes. Every muscle in my body ached, and it took everything I had just to climb the stairs to the flat. To my surprise, Sammy and Grayson were still downstairs, rearranging gym equipment. They looked like they were setting up for a full-circuit training session tomorrow. They both greeted me with a polite nod, and I managed a tired smile in return before heading upstairs. I was relieved they didn't stop me for questions. I honestly didn't think my legs could handle standing another minute. Since I'd rushed out for work that morning, I hadn't managed to shower. I wasn't expecting anyone to still be in the gym this late, so I waited upstairs until I heard them finishing up. Unfortunately, I didn't last that long. Sleep caught me before they were even done. When I woke the next morning, it took me a moment to remember where I was. My arm felt stiff, and the faint ache from my ribs reminded me of the events from earlier in the week. I realized I'd fallen asleep fully dressed, still in my work clothes from last night. My phone was pressed uncomfortably into my hip pocket, its screen glowing faintly as I fumbled to check the time. 6:45 a.m. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes. I couldn't recall even falling asleep. Still, I felt more rested than I had in days. I decided to take advantage of the early hour and grab a quick shower before anyone else woke up. As I stood, the faint smell of liquor and sweat from my clothes hit me, a not-so-gentle reminder of my bartending shift. Grabbing a towel from my duffel bag, I tiptoed toward the stairs, trying not to make a sound. But before I could leave, something caught my eye. Through the slightly open door, I could see the faint golden glow of the lamp by Sammy's bed. His hair was down for a change, softly fanned across the pillow. The way the light brushed against his face made him look peaceful. For a moment, I just stood there, caught off guard by how calm everything felt, the quiet, the warmth, the simplicity of it. Then, realizing I was lingering far too long, I quickly turned away. The last thing I wanted was for him to wake up and catch me standing there like an awkward statue. With that thought, I quietly slipped out of the flat and headed downstairs. The gym was nearly unrecognizable when I got there. Sammy and Grayson had clearly been busy last night. Equipment was rearranged into neat workout stations, four on each side of the room. One set looked designed for beginners, the other for veterans. The silence was eerie this early in the morning. I made my way carefully to the locker room, where the lights thankfully offered a warmer, more welcoming glow. The gym lights, in comparison, always gave off that flickering horror movie vibe that never failed to unsettle me. Setting my towel down on the counter, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The bruise along my ribs was darker than I remembered. The bandage on my arm was still holding, though the cut beneath it ached slightly. Cassie had rewrapped it for me halfway through my shift yesterday, fussing over it until she was satisfied. I hadn't planned to tell her how I got hurt, but when she accidentally brushed her hand against it, I couldn't hold back the wince. Of course, she immediately demanded answers, and Cassie wasn't the type to drop a topic easily. After a bit of interrogation, I finally told her I'd gotten lost and that Sammy had helped me out. I left out the more dangerous details, though. The truth was I was grateful, not just for Sammy finding me, but for everything since then. Turning on the shower, I braced myself as the first stream of warm water hit my arm. The sting was sharp, but I knew I'd be fine. I had work to do and training to focus on. Today was going to be a long day, but at least it was a new start. Chapter 28. Sammy's POV. I woke up a little past 6:30 a.m., at least, that's what my bedside alarm told me. I had meant to sleep in after how late Grayson and I worked the night before, but something else must have woken me up. As my eyes adjusted to the faint morning light, I tried to figure out what had disturbed my sleep. Maybe it was just my imagination, but the flat felt warmer than usual. Even with the hole in the roof, this heat felt different, almost heavy. The air conditioner usually kept things cool, especially when it was on full blast. Did I turn the AC off last night? I wondered. I didn't remember doing that. It must have gotten warmer overnight, because at some point, I had even kicked off my blanket. The comforter now barely covered my lower half. I shifted slightly, trying to find a cooler spot on the bed. A faint noise came from behind the partition wall. It was Dante stirring on the other side of the room. I could hear every sound clearly this morning. The soft rustle of sheets, the click of a phone being opened, the quiet shuffle of feet. He was moving carefully, trying not to make any noise. It sounded like he was getting ready for the day. I wasn't even sure when he had gone to sleep last night. By the time I came upstairs, it was already past midnight, and I had only caught a glimpse of him when he came back from work. Dante's footsteps grew closer. They stopped briefly near the foot of my bed. I froze. I could have pulled the comforter up higher, but I didn't move. Instead, I just listened to the sound of his quiet breathing for a few seconds that felt much longer than they probably were. After what felt like 9 long heartbeats, he shifted again. I heard his steps retreat toward the stairs. And just like that, he was gone. I exhaled slowly, unsure why that brief moment had left me feeling so restless. When I came downstairs around 9, Dante was already there, looking over the training stations Grayson and I had set up the previous night. I barely had time to greet him before I heard Grayson's familiar voice calling out from the front door. "You've got to be kidding me," Grayson said as soon as he walked in. "So, both of you managed to get hurt?" Dante looked apologetic, shifting his weight between his feet. It was a wrong place, wrong time kind of thing. I quickly stepped in. "I can handle the veterans today. Dante will stay with the novices." "No," Dante blurted out quickly. I can help. My arm looks worse than it really is, I promise." Grayson and I both glanced at the bandage around his arm. "If I think you're pushing it too far, you're sitting out for the day." "No complaints," I said firmly. It was the first time Dante met my gaze that morning, and he nodded seriously. Grayson and I left him to his warm-up routine and headed to the locker area to grab our gear. "Is it just me, or is it hotter than usual in here?" Grayson asked, unlocking a cabinet. "I've only been here 10 minutes and I'm already sweating." I nodded. "Same upstairs. The thermostat says the AC/C's on, but I don't feel anything." "I don't hear it running either," Grayson said. "It's completely silent." That explained the weird feeling earlier. Usually, the hum of the air vents could be heard throughout the building. Now there was nothing, just still, heavy air. "This is going to be a rough day," Grayson muttered. "The forecast says it's going to be scorching. The guys are going to hate you for this." I sighed and rubbed the bridge of my nose. "Great. Training went about as well as you'd expect on a day without air conditioning, which is to say, not well." The moment the first boxer walked through the door, I heard complaints about the heat. Grayson tried explaining that the AC was out and we just have to tough it out, but that didn't stop the grumbling. Despite the conditions, most of them pushed through. The novices complained the most, of course, and I had to remind them, more than once, to focus. Dante took charge of the novices while Grayson worked with the veterans. I floated between both groups, helping wherever needed. After a while, Grayson came over and sat beside me on the bench. "You know," he started, "when you said you'd help both groups, I thought you meant both. You've been on the novices' side for almost 2 hours." I glanced at him. "I just want to make sure they're not giving Dante a hard time. He's still injured." Grayson raised an eyebrow. "Dante seems to be doing fine from where I'm standing, which, by the way, is right next to you. I just want to make sure. Please. It takes a miracle to get you to train novices," Grayson cut in. "No way you'd do this voluntarily." I sighed, defeated, and let him pull me back toward the veterans area. But as I turned my head, my eyes found Dante again. The heat was getting to everyone. Sweat rolled down faces, and even some of the veterans had ditched their shirts. Dante looked exhausted but determined, focused on his group. And then, without warning, he tugged at the hem of his soaked shirt and pulled it off, wiping the sweat from his forehead before getting right back to work. For a moment, my thoughts drifted again, just for a heartbeat, before I forced myself to look away and focus on the drills in front of me. Because the truth was, training wasn't the only thing that felt challenging that day. Chapter 29. Sammy's POV. When Dante came into view, I froze. The light from the gym's windows caught the faint sheen of sweat glistening on his skin, tracing along the lines of his muscles as he wiped himself down with his damp shirt. For a moment, everything else around me faded into the background. My focus was completely drawn to him. Every subtle movement, every small wince when he brushed too close to the bruise on his side. That bruise still didn't look good. I was honestly surprised to see him training so hard, moving as if the pain barely existed. When he lifted the shirt again to wipe his chest, my gaze followed without thinking, until I suddenly realized he was looking right back at me. Our eyes locked. It felt like the whole gym went silent. Then, in an instant, Grayson's hand clamped firmly on my shoulder, jolting me back to reality. "Are you even listening to me, man?" he said sharply. I blinked and muttered a quiet apology before forcing myself back into rotation with the veteran fighters, pretending nothing had happened. Dante's POV. I was now absolutely certain that Sammy had been watching me closely. And to be fair, he wasn't doing a very good job of hiding it. All throughout the morning, I could feel his gaze on me as the novices trained. I had expected him to move between the groups like usual, but he stayed near our side most of the time. He didn't really step in, just observed quietly, arms folded, eyes following every drill. Meanwhile, I was fighting off exhaustion. The heat was unbearable, even with the few fans Grayson managed to set up. Everyone was sweating buckets, and the mats had to be wiped down every so often to prevent anyone from slipping. By midday, I finally gave in. Most of the guys had already taken their shirts off to deal with the heat. I'd kept mine on to hide the bandages and bruises, but at that point, it felt like standing in an oven. The pain from my side was bad enough, and now the heat was suffocating. So, I pulled the damp shirt off, careful not to tug too hard near the bruised area. Cool air hit my skin, offering little relief but enough to keep me going. As I used the shirt to wipe my face and neck, that same awareness washed over me again, the sense of someone watching. I looked around. Sammy wasn't standing where he'd been earlier. Then I spotted him across the gym, next to Grayson. He was supposed to be watching the veterans, but his eyes were unmistakably on me. His focus didn't waver, even as I caught him watching the motion of my hand as I wiped my shirt along my torso. When I lifted it to my chest again, our eyes met. Even from that distance, I could feel the air shift, like the energy between us had changed. Before either of us could say or do anything, Grayson placed a hand on Sammy's shoulder. Sammy turned away to respond, breaking the connection, and I snapped myself out of whatever daze I'd slipped into. I went straight back to sparring with Kyle, determined to shake it off. This wasn't a distraction I could afford right now. Still, it wasn't the last time it happened. All day long I could feel it, that silent pull. Every time I caught a glimpse of Sammy, his eyes would linger just a little too long, and it was almost impossible to ignore. Despite the heat and my injuries, the novices were surprisingly cooperative. Even Kyle, who was usually full of attitude, was quieter today. At one point, though he threw a punch that landed too close to my injured side. Pain shot through me and I stumbled slightly. His eyes widened as he rushed forward. "Sorry, man. I didn't mean to. Are you okay?" he asked quickly. I waved him off with a small smile. "It's fine. That one's on me. I should have blocked it." He hovered a moment longer, concern written all over his face, before finally stepping back. I straightened up, took a breath, and got right back into position. I'd been through worse before. This injury wasn't going to stop me. By the time the clock hit 5, I could hardly believe it. The day had dragged on forever. Sammy had already let a few of the veteran fighters leave early, and Kyle, being his usual outspoken self, marched right up to him demanding to know why. Sammy's reply was short and firm, "Mind your own business, Kyle." That shut the conversation down instantly. Kyle was the first one out the door when 5 o'clock hit. As the rest of the fighters trickled out, the three of us, Sammy, Grayson, and I, let out a collective sigh of relief. We looked like we'd just come out of a swimming pool. Even Sammy, who hadn't done much sparring, was drenched from head to toe. "I can't do this again in this heat," Grayson muttered, wiping his face with a towel. "Agreed," Sammy said. "Any updates on the air conditioning?" Grayson pushed a rack of weights back against the wall before answering. "They said they'll send someone Monday morning. Hopefully early. Otherwise, we're going to lose half the guys to the heat." Sammy nodded. "You and me both." Kyle almost lost it when he saw Carmen and Riley leave early. Grayson chuckled. Hopefully they made it to that volunteer gig on time. They looked exhausted. That explained why some of the guys had been allowed to go. I hadn't known they had another event to attend. I was pulled out of my thoughts when Sammy called my name. "You've done enough today," he said kindly. "Why don't you go ahead and hit the showers? Grayson and I can finish cleaning up here." I hesitated for a moment. "Are you sure?" He nodded, flashing one of those easy smiles that could light up a room. "Go for it. You've earned it." And honestly, the thought of a cold shower sounded like heaven. So, I didn't argue. Chapter 30. Sammy's POV. By the time Dante and I began winding down for the night, the heat inside the apartment had reached unbearable levels. I'd spent most of the evening on the phone with a repairman who promised to check the air conditioning, but as soon as the company's office hours ended, I knew I wasn't getting any help tonight. When I finally made it upstairs, Dante was already showered, relaxed, and sitting on the couch with a book in hand. He looked calm, while I felt like I'd been through a storm. After a long, frustrating call that led nowhere, I dragged myself to the shower and let the cool water wash away my irritation. It was still so hot that I didn't even bother putting on a shirt afterward. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, realizing I probably could have skipped the pants too. Dante looked up as I entered. Even from across the room, I could see the faint sheen of sweat glistening on his skin. He was wearing a light shirt and shorts, simple, casual, but for some reason, the sight caught me off guard. "No luck getting someone to fix it, huh?" he asked with a small, understanding smile. "I could hear most of your conversation from up here." His tone was light, but his eyes briefly shifted away from mine before returning, like he was trying not to stare. I chuckled softly. "Yeah, I might have gotten a little too frustrated on that call. Sorry you had to hear that." He waved it off easily. "Don't worry about it. I get it. Still, even with the heat, this place is better than my old apartment." I knew he was joking, but something about his words made me pause. Dante was set to receive his first paycheck soon, which meant he could finally buy a bed for his own place. For reasons I couldn't quite explain, the thought of him moving back to that empty apartment didn't sit right with me. He closed his book and stood, stretching lightly. Well, the Texas heat has definitely prepared me for this kind of weather. I opened my mouth to respond. "Is there anything I can do to make you more comfortable?" But my words trailed off. Because Dante had just reached behind his neck and pulled his shirt off. I froze for a second, completely thrown off. His lean figure came into view, his skin catching the faint glow of the room light. There were new bandages wrapped around his side and arm, a quiet reminder of how hard he'd pushed himself earlier in training. "That's okay," he said gently, picking up his book again. "I'll survive. Good night, Sammy." And just like that, he disappeared behind the wall leading to his room. I stood there for a long moment, every instinct screaming at me to stop him, to say something, anything, but I didn't. Instead, I turned off the lights and lay down on my bed. The air was heavy and warm, making it impossible to find comfort. I turned over several times, listening to the quiet hum of the night. The apartment was so still that I could hear both our breathing, slow and steady through the thin wall separating us. I didn't know if Dante was asleep or not, but my thoughts kept drifting to him. How close we were, how different things felt between us lately. The memory of our recent kiss came rushing back, uninvited but powerful. It was supposed to mean nothing, just a fleeting moment, but it didn't feel that way. And now, lying here, I realized how much I missed that closeness. How much I missed him. Dante's POV. Sleep didn't come easily. I had been half awake, half drifting, when a faint sound pulled me from the edge of sleep. For a moment, I thought Sammy was just shifting in bed, but then I realized how quiet everything else was. The silence between our rooms felt charged, like the air itself was aware of something unspoken between us. I turned to face the wall, listening. I could hear his breathing, slow, deep, uneven at times, like he was wrestling with thoughts that wouldn't let him rest. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was everything we hadn't said out loud. Either way, I couldn't ignore how aware I'd become of his presence just a few feet away. Every sound he made seemed amplified in the stillness, echoing through my chest like a heartbeat. When he whispered my name softly, almost hesitant, I froze. Dante. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. Then I heard it again. Dante. My heart started racing. I wasn't sure what to say, or even if I should respond, but before I could overthink it, a quiet yes escaped my lips. There was a pause, long enough that I began to wonder if I should have stayed silent. Then, softly, he spoke again. Are you still awake? I swallowed hard. Yeah, I managed to reply. Another pause. The air between us seemed to hum with quiet tension. I could almost picture him lying there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the same things I was. The same memories. The same uncertainty. Neither of us said another word after that. But in that silence, I felt something shift, something deeper than words could capture. And even though the night stretched long and sleepless, there was a strange comfort in knowing that, in the quiet heat of that small apartment, neither of us was truly alone. Chapter 31. Sammy's POV. The quiet that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever experienced. After everything that happened, neither of us said much. The air felt charged, tense yet oddly peaceful, as if both of us were trying to make sense of what had just transpired. I could almost feel the warmth of Dante's embarrassment through the wall separating us. The silence between us said more than words could ever manage. Dante. I called softly. It took a long moment before I heard his voice, faint, almost hesitant. Yes. A small smile tugged at my lips. Somehow, just hearing his voice again eased the strange ache in my chest. Sleep well, I said quietly, teasing just enough to cut through the tension. There was a pause, followed by the sound of him shifting, probably tidying up before settling down for the night. After a few seconds, his voice floated back through the still air. You too. It wasn't much, but in that simple exchange, something unspoken lingered between us. Dante's POV. Embarrassment didn't even begin to describe how I felt the next morning. The moment my eyes opened, memories from last night came flooding back in vivid detail. My heart started racing all over again, and all I could do was bury my face in my pillow, groaning quietly. How was I supposed to face Sammy after that? The clock read 8 a.m. I had no shifts at Tidal Wave today, and Fight Club was closed on Sundays. My plan was to work on the roof and, hopefully, keep busy enough to avoid thinking about, well, everything. Still, I couldn't deny it, I'd slept better than I had in weeks. Despite the awkwardness, something about last night had quieted the noise in my head. I stayed in bed for a while, listening. It was quiet, too quiet, which told me Sammy was already awake. Eventually, I convinced myself to move. I threw on a shirt and shorts, took a deep breath, and stepped out from behind the wall. He was sitting cross-legged on his bed, eyes closed, hands resting calmly on his knees. His hair fell loosely over his shoulders, catching the morning light that spilled through the window. He looked peaceful, grounded, like nothing from last night had fazed him. I froze. Maybe I could just sneak by unnoticed. No such luck. "Good morning," Sammy said, eyes slowly opening as they met mine. Hi," I stammered, caught completely off guard. He stretched, his movements effortless and fluid. I looked away quickly, pretending to be fascinated by a crack in the wall. "Did you sleep well?" he asked as he stood, his tone warm and casual. I could only manage a nod. Words were not my friend this morning. "Good," he said, smiling faintly. "I was going to ask if you had any plans for today." I hesitated. I was just going to work on the roof a bit more." His gaze lingered on me in a way that made it hard to breathe. It wasn't just his eyes, it was the way he saw me, as if he could read every single thought running through my head. "I actually have an errand to run later," he said. "And honestly, I don't feel comfortable letting you climb up there alone. So, if you're free, would you like to come with me?" I blinked, processing his words. Would I have liked to spend the day with him? Absolutely. I'd follow Sammy anywhere if he asked, not that I'd ever admit that out loud. But there was danger in that idea too. The line between us was already blurred. Last night had proven that. Still, as I looked at him, calm, confident, and waiting for my answer, my resolve faltered. "Sure," I said finally, the words slipping out before I could stop it. A small, satisfied smile crossed his face. And just like that, I knew this day was going to be far more complicated than I'd planned. Chapter 32. Sammy's POV. I honestly wasn't sure what made me think that taking Dante to visit my uncle in prison was a great idea for a first outing. Of course, this wasn't technically a date, but that's what I kept telling myself, just to lighten the mood of what was already a heavy day. It had been a while since I last saw Uncle Jimmy. A couple of months of peaceful silence, which I didn't mind at all. He usually reached out only when he needed something, and it was never good news when he did. The penitentiary was about an hour's drive up north. I hadn't really planned out the trip, or considered the fact that Dante had been avoiding conversation and my gaze since we got into the car. He asked where we were going when we first got on the road, but I told him we had a few stops to make, which was true. Besides visiting my uncle, we also needed to swing by the hardware store to pick up supplies for the fight club, more tarp in case the rain got worse. Water had already started leaking through a hole in the roof, though I managed to catch it with a bucket for now. Grayson said it was only the beginning of a long stretch of wet weeks ahead. Dante stayed quiet for the first 15 or 20 minutes, but after 25, the silence started to feel heavier than the rain clouds above us. "So, how's work at Tidal Wave?" I finally asked, pretending I didn't already hear daily updates from Cass, who loved giving me play-by-play stories about how well Dante was doing. I always acted uninterested, but in truth, I liked hearing about his progress. It was also my way of checking in, seeing where his energy was at. Dante was the kind of person who'd help anyone without hesitation. If his day had been stressful, I wanted to make sure the next one at Fight Club was at least a little easier for him. Though, between Kyle and the broken air conditioner, I wasn't exactly doing the best job of that lately. "It's going well," Dante said with a small nod. "I think I've finally learned who the regulars are, which helps. Definitely misjudged that lively crowd my first night." He turned to smile at me, and that alone made the corners of my lips curl upward. It was the first time he looked at me today without seeming embarrassed. "I'm glad to hear that," I said. "It takes time to adjust, but once you do, it's actually a pretty great place. Most of the regulars are good people. They even come out to support the guys during fights. Then we all meet up at Tidal Wave afterward to unwind. It's a nice crowd." It felt good to have his attention again. "That sounds about right," he said with a soft chuckle. That sound alone made me want to turn the car around and forget the rest of the day. I'm also really grateful for the staff. Everyone in the kitchen's been kind, and Cassie's helped me a lot. Howard is? Well, Howard, but even that has its charm. I couldn't help but smile. Howard was definitely a unique character. For someone who owned a place meant for socializing, he wasn't much of a talker himself. But that was part of what made him great. He was a bit reserved, just like me. Whenever he invited me over for dinner with his wife, I was always surprised at how much he actually opened up in private. In some strange way, he reminded me of my father. If my father had been even half the decent man Howard was. Howard often tried to be home as much as possible to care for his wife. He never told anyone about how serious her health condition was and made me promise to keep that a secret. He once told me, "People will believe whatever they want. It's none of their business anyway." And I got that. Some things are meant to stay private. Still, I sometimes thought his staff had a right to know, especially since Howard often had to step away. If it weren't for Cass, Tidal Wave probably wouldn't survive. But everyone knew that Cass, Howard, and the rest of the staff. That's why Howard gave her full freedom to run things as she saw fit. It was the only way the place could stay open. "Howard's definitely one of a kind," I said, smiling at Dante. "But he'll grow on you, I promise." He gave an understanding nod, then went quiet again. I wasn't ready to fall back into silence, so I kept the conversation going. "So, what do you think of New York now? Still feels different from Texas?" I asked, glancing at him briefly. He was staring straight ahead, thoughtful. "Yes," he said finally. "For sure. I think I chose the right city, I just had the wrong expectations at first." That answer lifted my spirits more than I expected. But it also made me more curious about him, his past, and what brought him here. From the few things Dante had shared, I tried to piece together his story, his old life, the one he refused to talk about. I knew both his parents had passed away. From the way he spoke about his mother, it was clear how much he adored her. I still remembered how he fixed that disaster of a dinner the night he moved in. It showed how much he learned from her. He didn't talk about her often, but when he did, I could feel the warmth in his words. His father, though, that was different. Whenever he mentioned him, his tone carried something I knew too well: fear. His father had been a professional boxer, and Dante once told me he used to compete too. I wondered if his father had been strict, but then I remembered the first night I met Dante, lying on the cold pavement after the fight with Willis. The way he reacted to people trying to help him, that wasn't just stress. It was fear. Did you learn fear? That wasn't the result of tough love. That was the result of something much darker. And then there was the last piece of his past, the reason he came to New York. He once mentioned a relationship, a man he'd been with back in Texas. From what little he said, that relationship was what drove him to leave. If it weren't for that one small detail, and that first, unforgettable moment we shared, I'm not sure I would have had the courage to pursue him. But even now, that past seemed to haunt him. I noticed how he still jumped when someone tapped his shoulder or when his phone buzzed. It wasn't just anxiety, it was fear of being found. Call it a hunch, but Dante wasn't just running from Texas. He was running from a person. And with his father gone, there was only one other person who could still have that kind of power over him. Someone who kept him looking over his shoulder, still trying to escape. Chapter 33. Dante's POV. When Sammy pulled into a large, mostly empty parking lot, I wasn't sure where we were at first. Then I noticed the huge words painted on the side of the building, Rikers Correction Center, and everything clicked. Or at least, I thought it did. Then new questions started forming. Is this a prison? I asked, watching Sammy shift the car into park. Yeah, he replied casually. Sorry, it's just one of a few stops we have to make today. You can stay in the car if you'd like, I'll leave the keys. I honestly considered it for a moment, but curiosity soon outweighed my discomfort. I wanted to know who Sammy was visiting badly enough to ignore the uneasy feeling that came with walking into a place like this. It's okay, I said finally, unbuckling my seatbelt. Sammy nodded and got out of the car, locking it behind us as we headed toward the entrance. The sun was already burning through the sky, and it wasn't even noon yet. By the time we reached the front doors, I could feel sweat trickling down the side of my face. Luckily, Sammy seemed to know his way around. We passed through security, it was less intimidating than I expected, and handed over our belongings to be kept until after the visit. The officers were surprisingly friendly, greeting Sammy like they knew him. The familiarity between him and some of the staff caught my attention. Just how often did he come here? We're heading through here, Sammy said, breaking my thoughts. You can sit over there if you'd like. I'll try to make this quick. We'd entered a wide room divided by thick glass that stretched from one end to the other. On our side were a few booths and plastic chairs for visitors. On the other, inmates moved freely under supervision. I took a seat against the back wall while Sammy approached an empty booth. No one was seated across from him yet, but moments later, a new inmate entered the room, and it was impossible not to notice him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and muscular, the kind of presence that filled the room instantly. His beard was long and dark, matching his black hair that contrasted sharply with Sammy's lighter tones. There was something about him, just enough resemblance to Sammy to make me wonder. I glanced between them, trying to piece it together. Who was this man? Sammy's POV. You look awful, I said, picking up the phone on my side of the glass. I could say the same about you, came the reply, low and sharp. My Uncle Jimmy's expression stayed hard for several seconds. Every time his jaw clenched, the muscles in his face seemed to tighten in perfect rhythm. I'd sat in this exact chair, across from this same man, more times than I could count, and every single time, a chill ran down my spine. It was like looking at a ghost. My father's ghost. After a long moment, Jimmy's face broke into a grin, quick and sudden, like even his muscles weren't ready for it. Who got to you this time? His voice was cold, so cold it didn't match the faint smile on his lips. Some kids in Hunts Point, I said, brushing it off. Long story. Not important right now. He leaned back slightly. You don't come around as much anymore. I could hear the disappointment behind his tone, masked as annoyance. He was right that I hadn't made much effort to visit him. And maybe that made me a terrible nephew, but the truth was simple. Uncle Jimmy was bad news. He always had been. Fight Club's been getting busier, I said, half lying. It had been getting busier, but that wasn't the reason I'd stayed away. There were plenty of other reasons, ones I didn't care to unpack. He let out a grunt, unimpressed. I don't know why you waste your time with that place, he said. Work for me, and you'd never have to worry about money again. Family takes care of family. I felt my stomach tighten at those words. Memories I'd worked hard to bury started to claw their way back to the surface. I pushed them down just like I always did. I like what I do, I said firmly. For a moment, it looked like he might stand up and walk away. But instead, he went for something worse. You'd really turn your back on your only family? His tone hardened. After everything I did for you? I'm in here because of you. Those words hit me like a punch to the chest. Anger, hot and familiar, flared through me before I could stop it. You're here because of your own actions, I snapped, my voice rising. Don't you dare try to put that on me. If you ever try to drag me into your mess again, I'll leave you here to deal with it alone. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something, shock, maybe hurt, but it was too late to take it back. The words were out, and they couldn't be unsaid. I slammed the phone back onto the receiver and stood abruptly. Without looking back, I walked straight to Dante, took his hand, and led him out of that room. Behind us, I could faintly hear the thud of Jimmy's fists pounding on the glass before an officer moved to restrain him. I didn't turn around once. By the time we got back to my Chevy, my hands were trembling. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. You okay? Dante asked softly. His tone was cautious, almost afraid to interrupt. I winced, realizing how abruptly I'd dragged him out of there. I'm sorry, I said quickly. I shouldn't have pulled you like that. Are you okay? He asked again, this time with more concern. Despite everything, I managed a small smile. I'm now. Thank you. He nodded slowly, still watching me carefully. Dante always took his time before speaking, like he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I know it's not really my place to ask, he began, but I cut him off gently. I brought you here, I said. You have every right to ask. He nodded again. Who was that in there? I took a deep breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That man, I said quietly, was my uncle, Jimmy. Dante's eyes widened slightly, though he tried to hide it with a polite nod. I could see the next question forming before he even asked it. Why is he in there? I stared ahead for a long moment. That was a heavy question, one I didn't like answering even to myself. Another deep breath. Because, I said slowly, besides the charges for drugs, weapons, and assault, my uncle was also convicted for something else. Dante looked at me, waiting. I finally met his eyes. He was convicted for shooting my father. Chapter 34. Dante's POV. It was safe to say I had no words for what Sammy had just revealed to me. Literally none. I tried to speak but stopped myself. Fortunately, Sammy took over before the silence grew heavier. There's a lot to take in, I know, he said, finally starting the car. It's been years now. And honestly, my father wasn't exactly a good person to begin with. That I could understand all too well. People have their weaknesses, Sammy continued. His was alcohol. He used to hurt my mom and me a lot when I was growing up. It was cowardly of him. I realized in that moment how little I truly knew about Sammy. He was in business with Jimmy back then, Sammy went on. But when Jimmy found out my father had taken all their savings to feed his gambling and drinking habits, things turned bad. The night Jimmy came over to confront him, my father was already drunk. Before I could understand what was happening, I heard gunshots coming from the backyard. When I ran out, Jimmy was standing over my father. He didn't make it. A wave of emotions hit me all at once. Shock, sadness, disbelief, and even anger. Sammy's voice was calm, but I could feel the pain in his words. Opening up like that wasn't easy. I wondered what made him decide to share something so personal with me, until he answered it himself. I know that was a lot, he said softly. It's been years since it happened, but I wanted to tell you because I realized I haven't shared much about myself. It's not that I don't want you to know me, it's just that I've always been ashamed of my family. After my mom passed, Grayson and Cass took me in. They're my true family now. As far as I'm concerned, you've already met everyone who matters to me. That last part made my heart skip a beat, in a good way, but also in a way that left me uneasy. His honesty hit me deeply. While Sammy had shared his painful past, I'd barely let him see mine. Hearing his story made me feel a strange mix of guilt and admiration. He had gone through so much, yet turned his life around. Meanwhile, I had let my past define me. My father wasn't exactly kind either, I said quietly, surprising even myself. Sammy glanced at me, his expression softening as he listened. He drank himself sick after his coaching career ended. He was more of a coach than a father. Over time, he became abusive toward both my mom and me. Sammy's jaw tensed, and I could see the empathy in his eyes. I guess I didn't take the same path of healing that you did, I continued. After he passed, I fell for one of his trainees, a rising fighter. He was charming at first, helped me through the grief. But, as it turned out, he wasn't much different from my father. He looked up to him in ways I didn't understand, and over time, that admiration became something darker. Sammy's eyes stayed on me longer than they should have, making me want to remind him that he was still driving. So, when you said you left Texas because of him, he said carefully. I nodded. I did. I left after he had a breakdown at our home. Just thinking about that night made my heart race. My palms grew clammy, my chest heavy. It was the night I barely made it out alive. The car fell silent. Sammy didn't rush to fill the space. I assumed he was processing everything, just as I was. I'd basically confessed how broken I was. I wouldn't have blamed him if he saw me differently now. But when Sammy finally spoke, his tone was firm. Don't do that, he said. Do what? I asked. Blame yourself for what someone else did to you. That man hurt you, he broke your trust. None of that was your fault. There was a quiet intensity in Sammy's voice. He wasn't shouting, but every word carried a weight of conviction. It was protective, almost fierce. I could feel the heat of his anger, not at me, but at the man who had hurt me. It reminded me of what he said earlier about his father and Jimmy. I had no idea what kind of business his family was once involved in, but one thing was clear: Sammy had inherited their strength and determination without their cruelty. He was different. Or maybe, that's what I wanted to believe. As I watched him drive, I found myself wondering how many more secrets he carried, and what would happen when they finally came to light. Sammy's POV. I tried to stay calm, but inside, I was boiling. Hearing Dante's story confirmed what I'd long suspected, but that didn't make it any easier. I'd hoped someone had shown him real love growing up, that maybe I was wrong about the pain I'd seen in his eyes. But I wasn't. His ex, the man who'd hurt him, sounded like the worst kind of person. It took everything in me not to let my anger show. I looked over at Dante once we pulled into the hardware store parking lot. For a moment I just watched him. The way the morning light hit his face, the way his eyes softened when he looked away. He was striking. Beautiful even. It was easy to see why anyone would fall for him. But beyond that, I wanted him to see himself the way I did. To understand his worth. Because in a world like this, self-love wasn't just important, it was survival. I exhaled quietly and gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Come on," I said gently. "Let's get what we need and head home." Thanks for listening to today's BL story. If it made your heart skip a beat, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Only here on BL Stories, where love knows no limits.